It was a Tuesday night when everything changed. The air in the apartment felt thick, as if the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I sat on the couch, staring at the TV, trying to distract myself from the tension in the room. Sarah stood across from me, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, eyes fixed on the carpet. I had felt the shift in our relationship for weeks now, small cracks that started as little complaints but were growing into something I couldn't ignore. The way she had been distant, the long silences that stretched between us, the lack of warmth I once felt. I could feel it coming, and I knew tonight would be the night she'd say it. I had braced myself for this moment, but nothing prepared me for how calm I felt when she finally spoke. "Alex," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think I need a break to figure out what I really want." Her words hit me like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I sat back into the couch, my gaze fixed on her face, waiting for more. There was something rehearsed in her tone, something practiced that made me feel like I was just another chapter in a story she had already decided on. I studied her, looking for signs of regret, guilt, anything that would tell me she wasn't completely sure. But her face was calm, almost polite, as if she were asking for directions, not ending a relationship. She wasn't angry. She wasn't upset. She was just distant. "Okay," I replied, my voice surprisingly even. "Take all the time you need." She blinked, clearly taken aback by my response. "Wait, you're okay with that?" "Sure," I said, sitting up slightly. "But let's make one thing clear. If we're not together, we're not living together. You'll need to pack your things and go." The words felt final. I had expected her to argue, to push back, but instead, she looked at me like I was the stranger. She opened her mouth, probably to say something, but I held up a hand. "This apartment is in my name. You said you needed time to think, but I can't do this with you here." Her face flushed with shock, her mouth hanging open. "But that's not what I meant. I just need space." I wasn't saying it was over. I stood up slowly, trying to keep my tone calm, even though inside I felt a storm brewing. "Sarah, this is happening because you chose it. You said you needed time, and I'm giving it to you. But I'm not going to pretend we're okay when we're clearly not." She took a step back, looking around the room as if the walls had betrayed her. "You can't just throw me out like this," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm not throwing you out. You're leaving because you want to," I replied coldly. "I'm just respecting your decision." Her eyes welled up with tears and she trembled slightly, but I remained steady. She had made her choice and I was just following through on what she had already set in motion. "So that's it?" she asked quietly. 3 years and you're just done?" I nodded once, firmly. "You wanted a break. I'm giving you one." She tried to force a smile, but it was weak and her eyes were brimming with unshed tears. "I thought you'd fight for me." I felt a pang in my chest, but I didn't let it show. "You can't fight for someone who's already somewhere else." The room was silent then, the only sound was the soft rustling of the air conditioner. She looked at me, almost pleading, as if she wanted me to change my mind. But I didn't. I couldn't. "I'll be changing the locks tomorrow," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You need to get your things before then." She didn't say another word. She just stared at me as if I had become a complete stranger. I walked past her, heading for the bedroom. That night, she stayed on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. She didn't cry or scream. She just stared at the blank TV screen, almost as if waiting for something to change, for something to break. I locked the door behind me as I crawled into bed, feeling numb. Tomorrow it would all be over. The life we'd built, the memories we'd made, all of it shattered in a single night. But somewhere deep down, I knew it was for the best. In the morning, things would be different. The morning came with a quiet that felt suffocating. I woke up early, the room still heavy with the weight of last night's conversation. For a brief moment, I thought maybe it had all been a bad dream. Maybe Sarah would still be here, apologizing, and everything would go back to normal. But as soon as I stepped out of the bedroom, I saw it. The couch was empty, and the soft rustle of packing boxes filled the air. She hadn't even waited for me to wake up. I stood there for a moment, watching her move about the room. She was folding clothes, moving as if everything was perfectly normal. But there was a tremor in her hands, and I could see her lips tremble as she folded a shirt she had worn the night we first met. My heart ached at the sight of her, but I kept my distance. She had made her choice and now she had to live with it. I cleared my throat to break the silence. "Sarah, I need to leave for work soon." She paused, glancing at me briefly. Her eyes were red, but she quickly wiped the tears away. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it," she said quietly. I shrugged, trying to maintain my composure. "I did. And I'm not going to pretend it doesn't hurt, but this is what you wanted, right? Time to think. She nodded slowly, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. It's just, I didn't want this to end like this. I didn't know how to respond to that. You made the choice, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I'm just respecting it. She turned her back to me, her shoulders shaking as she tried to stifle her sobs. I knew she wasn't crying for me but for what we had lost. For what she had chosen to walk away from. I didn't know what else to say. I couldn't apologize for something I didn't believe in, and I couldn't go back to the way things were. So, I stood there watching as she packed the last of her things into a bag. There was no going back now. Before I left for work, I turned to her. You have until tonight. I'll be changing the locks then. She didn't respond. She didn't even look up. I could hear the sound of her wiping her nose, but I didn't turn around. I knew it was over. By the time I got home that evening, everything was gone. The apartment felt emptier than it had ever been. Sarah had taken her things, but what really hurt was the absence of her presence. The silence of her absence was louder than any argument we had ever had. On the kitchen counter there was a key and a note. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. You'll regret this. It wasn't the first time she'd said something like that. But this time I wasn't going to fall for it. I picked up the key and pocketed it. I didn't need any reminders of her. I sat on the couch, staring at the empty walls. I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just emptiness. I wasn't angry at her anymore. I wasn't even angry at myself. I had done what I thought was right. And for the first time in months I felt a strange sense of calm. I went to bed that night not knowing what tomorrow would bring, but at least I knew I wouldn't have to carry this weight anymore. It was over. The next few days felt like a blur. Work became my escape, my routine, my distraction. I buried myself in it, focused on the new project we had in Dallas, hoping it would keep my mind off the empty apartment and the chaos that had just unraveled. But even at work, the absence of Sarah haunted me. It wasn't that I missed her, it was the unsettling silence that came with her departure. The kind of silence that sits heavily in your chest, squeezing every breath out of you until all that's left is a faint echo of something that used to matter. I checked my phone after a long day at the construction site, and there it was, a message from Emily, Sarah's younger sister. I had expected it, but it still hit me like a punch to the gut. Just so you know, the message began, Lillian's staying with Henry. She says it's temporary. I read it twice, processing the words. Henry. Of course. I had suspected as much. It was no secret that Sarah had always kept someone in the background, just in case things didn't work out. And now, it seemed like she was testing the waters with him. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I stared at the screen, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts I didn't want to have. It wasn't a surprise, but it still stung. A week passed without a word from Sarah. No calls. No texts. Just emptiness. But I couldn't deny it. I was beginning to feel lighter. I had taken the first step toward moving on, even if it felt like I was stepping into the unknown. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Sabrina, Emily's best friend and someone I had always trusted. Her words were blunt but filled with a strange mix of concern and empathy. She's still telling people you're heartbroken, that you're spiraling. I thought you should know. I set the phone down on the counter, running my fingers through my hair. I knew Sarah had a way of twisting the narrative to make herself the victim, but to hear it from Sabrina made it feel all the more real. The person I had once loved was now a stranger, and she was painting a picture of me that wasn't true. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. I couldn't afford to. I was being called in for a new assignment, a 3-month project in Miami, far away from the shadows of my past. It was exactly what I needed, even if I didn't want to admit it. A fresh start. A new beginning. The day I left for Miami, Sabrina called again, this time with news that threw me off balance. You won't believe this, she said, her voice quieter than usual. She's moved in with Henry. It's not just temporary anymore. The words stung more than I expected. I didn't know why, but I still felt like I was being dragged into her mess. Like I hadn't fully escaped yet. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Let her do whatever she wants. I'm not going to get caught up in her drama anymore. Are you sure? Sabrina asked, her voice hesitant. I hate seeing you like this. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt the weight of everything. I was trying to move forward, but every time I thought I was free, something pulled me back. A message. A phone call. The ghost of Sarah still lingered in my life. I'm sure, I replied, my voice firm. I've already let go. I just need to keep going. Miami was everything I needed. I settled into the routine quickly, immersing myself in the project. Long hours at the site, countless meetings, and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Each day felt like a small victory. Each blueprint approved, every milestone achieved brought me closer to the version of myself I wanted to be, stronger, focused, and above all, free. And then, just as I thought I was in the clear, I got another text from Sabrina. This time, there was no hesitation in her voice. "She's still posting about you," she said. "She's telling people you kicked her out. That you were cruel." I stared at the screen for a moment, not knowing how to respond. The lies. The manipulation. It wasn't surprising, but it still hit harder than I expected. I took a deep breath, letting the frustration wash over me for a moment before replying, "Let her. She needs to feel like she's in control of the story. I don't have to defend myself." Sabrina didn't respond right away. Instead, I heard the soft rustling of her moving something in the background. "You're doing well," she said quietly. "I hope you know that." It was the first time someone had said that to me in a while. It made me realize something. I didn't need Sarah's validation. I didn't need her to approve of how I moved on. I was doing it for myself, and that was enough. Life in Miami continued, and I started to find peace. My days were long and filled with work, but at night I was alone with my thoughts. Alone but not lonely. The apartment was small and modest, but it felt like mine. The stillness of the space was calming. But then, just when I thought I could finally breathe again, I received a message from Emily. It was a simple, straightforward update. "Lillian's still with Henry. And I think it's for good this time." I felt a strange calm wash over me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I had already accepted that chapter of my life. The real shock came when Emily added something at the end. She says she's never been happier. For some reason that hurt more than anything else. Not because I wanted her to be unhappy, but because it was the final confirmation that I was no longer part of her world. And I was okay with that. As the weeks went by, the noise of Sarah's departure faded into a dull hum. I threw myself into the work in Miami, focusing on the details, managing the team, making sure everything was running smoothly. It was a fresh start, far from the echoes of a broken relationship. For the first time in months, I felt like I was truly moving forward. The future felt clearer, less clouded by the confusion and emotional turmoil I had left behind in Dallas. But just as I was finding my stride, life had a way of throwing curveballs. It was a Friday afternoon when I got a call from Sabrina. I wasn't sure if I was ready for another update on Sarah, but the timing felt off. I stepped out onto the balcony, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that was creeping in. "Hey, I just thought you should know something," Sabrina started, her voice much more cautious than usual. "Lillian's been talking about you again. She's telling people you weren't who you seemed to be. That you were controlling and manipulative. It's all coming out now." I sighed, pressing a hand to my forehead as the familiar weight of anger and frustration hit me once more. I had expected it, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. "I'm done with this," I said, my voice cold. "She can say whatever she wants. It's not my problem anymore." "You sure?" Sabrina asked, her concern evident. "She's been reaching out to people from your old life, your friends, some of your family. She's got this narrative about you that she's been pushing." "I don't care," I replied. "I really don't. I've been moving on. I'm not going back to that." And I meant it. It was exhausting, this constant fight for control of a story that had already been written. I had been through it, and now I was living in the aftermath. Sarah was still trying to make herself the center of my life, but I wouldn't let her. Not anymore. The next few weeks felt like a blur of meetings, conference calls, and late nights at the site. But amidst the chaos, there was a strange peace. The noise of my past had been drowned out by the rhythm of my present. I had a routine now, and that routine was mine. I was in charge of my own story, and it was starting to feel like I was the one writing it. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the site, I was sitting alone in my apartment, nursing a beer and scrolling through emails when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sabrina. I was used to hearing from her every now and then, but this message felt different. Short. To the point. "It's done. She moved out. Henry left her." I stared at the screen for a long time. The words didn't feel like much of a surprise, but the finality of it hit me harder than I expected. In the end, the person Sarah had relied on to save her wasn't enough. And now she was alone, back at square one, just like I had been. But something inside me, something I didn't expect, softened. I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Not because I wanted to go back to her, but because I knew how it felt to be left with nothing but yourself and your mistakes. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sat back and took a deep breath. Life had moved on for both of us, and now we were living with the consequences of the choices we had made. But in that moment I knew something else. The person I had once been wasn't who I was now. I had grown. I had changed. I had learned to let go. The following week I found myself at a crossroads. The project in Miami was wrapping up, and I had the option to either stay in the city for another assignment or head back home. My boss, Gary, had called me in for a meeting earlier that day to offer me a promotion, one that would take me back to Dallas where everything had started. But I didn't know if I was ready to return. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the ghosts of my past. Sabrina had asked me about it the night before, after we'd had a long conversation over dinner. What do you think? Going back to Dallas? I'd taken a moment to think it over before answering. I don't know. I feel like I've moved past everything that happened there. I've built something here. Maybe it's time to let this chapter be my new beginning. She smiled, her eyes warm. You're doing well. Just make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. And so I decided I didn't need to go back to Dallas. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Miami was becoming home. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was where I needed to be. The next morning, I sent Gary an email letting him know I was ready to take on a new challenge in Miami. No looking back. No second guessing. I was moving forward and nothing would stop me. As the days passed, my connection with Sabrina deepened. We spent more time together, not as a replacement for the past but as two people who had found something real in each other. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic moments. It was simple. And it was exactly what I needed. One evening after dinner, we sat on the balcony of the apartment, watching the sun set over the skyline. I was still processing everything that had happened over the last few months. Sarah's departure, the project, the new path I was taking. But with Sabrina by my side, everything felt clearer. I wasn't alone anymore. You know, Sabrina said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, I'm glad you're here. I turned to her, smiling. Me too. For the first time in months I felt peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from running away from the past. It was the kind that comes from accepting it, moving forward, and knowing that everything that had happened was a part of who I was becoming. A few weeks passed and life in Miami settled into a rhythm. I had adjusted to my new routine, long workdays filled with meetings, site visits, and late-night reports. It was exhausting, but it kept me focused and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction when I looked at the progress we had made. The project was nearly complete and everything was falling into place. I had a new sense of purpose that I hadn't had in years, and it felt good to know that I was finally in control of my own future. Sabrina and I had grown closer, not in a rushed or dramatic way but in a way that felt natural. We spent more time together and our conversations were easy. There were no expectations, no pressure, just two people enjoying each other's company. It wasn't love yet, but it was something real, something that felt steady and comforting. One evening after work, Sabrina invited me to her final art showcase. Her art program was coming to an end, and the exhibition was being held at a small gallery tucked away in the city. I hadn't been to one of her shows before, but something told me this would be important. I agreed to go, though I wasn't sure what to expect. The gallery was cozy, with soft lighting that made the space feel intimate. The walls were lined with photographs and paintings, each one showcasing a different piece of Sabrina's journey. She had poured her heart into this program, and it was clear from the pieces on display that it had been a transformative experience for her. I wandered through the gallery, admiring her work, when one photograph caught my eye. It was a candid shot of Sabrina and me sitting together on a stone staircase near the harbor in Miami. We were laughing about something small, the kind of moment that you don't plan but becomes a memory all on its own. It was simple, raw, and real. I walked over to Sabrina, who had just entered the room, and nodded toward the photograph. When did you take that? I asked, my voice soft with surprise. She smiled gently, her eyes lighting up with a quiet affection. You were too busy explaining why pigeons are fearless to notice. I chuckled, shaking my head. It's a good picture. It's honest, she replied, her voice almost a whisper. I stared at the photo for a moment, taking in the peacefulness of it. It didn't scream revenge or new beginnings. It didn't even scream love. It was just peaceful. A moment captured in time that wasn't about anyone else but us. That night after the show, I went home feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, contentment. It wasn't the rush of a new relationship or the excitement of a fresh start. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had finally found peace, not in escaping my past, but in learning from it and moving forward. When I got home, I opened my social media account for the first time in months. I hadn't checked it, hadn't thought about it much since the whole ordeal with Sarah. But tonight something made me want to. I found the photo Sabrina had taken of us on the staircase, and without overthinking it, I posted it. The caption was simple, just one line: "Sometimes peace looks like starting over quietly." After I posted it, I paused for a moment, letting the weight of everything sink in. I had posted that for me, not for anyone else. Not for Sarah, not for validation. Just for myself. I closed my phone and turned it off. There was no need for notifications, no need for any more drama. I had made peace with my past, and it was time to focus on the present. The next day, as I sat at my desk at work, I received a message that I wasn't expecting. It was from Lillian. Just one word. All caps. What? I stared at the screen for a long time, my mind racing. My heart didn't race though. I didn't feel the urge to respond. I didn't feel angry or upset. I just felt indifferent. She had left. She had made her choices, and now I was living mine. I deleted the message without opening it. I didn't need to look back anymore. I had moved on, and the flood of messages that followed, the angry voicemails, the threats, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was no longer tied to her. I had let go. A few days later, Sabrina and I took a trip to the beach, just to enjoy the sun and the sound of the waves. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a day to breathe, to be away from everything. We walked along the shoreline, chatting about life, about the future, and about where we both wanted to go next. It was simple, but in that simplicity I found something beautiful. "I think we're finally at peace with everything, aren't we?" Sabrina asked as we stopped to sit on the sand. I nodded, looking out at the horizon. Yeah. It's not about having everything figured out. It's just about moving forward, one step at a time. She smiled, her eyes bright and full of warmth. "I'm glad we're on this journey together." I smiled back, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. The road ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. Whatever happened, I knew I had made it through the storm, and now I was finally walking into the light.